So briefly, this is our proposed agenda. We'll probably diverge from it, but something to keep us on track. So pleased that you can be here. We have with us David Kesler, principal of David Kesler Architect, also adjunct professor at the University of San Francisco's College of Arts and Sciences. He studied at Pratt Institute and Columbia University. He's an award-winning multidisciplinary architect and watercolorist. He also hosts The Architect's Guide, a podcast exploring international culture and the arts through the architectural lens, which we were very fortunate to participate in with Helmut. We also have Dr. Leon Barker, a reader in performance at the University of the Arts, London's Wimbledon College of Arts. Leon leads applied research in robot-human interaction, machine learning, computer vision, volumetric capture, and mixed reality systems. With over a decade of experience, he develops interactive installations and immersive tools across sectors, including heritage, healthcare, and forensics. Dr. Saina Akhond, his colleague, is senior lecturer and course leader in the course Creative Robotics at UAL's Creative Computing Institute. Dr. Akhond researches soft robotics, adaptive systems, and their applications in healthcare. She earned her PhD from the Imperial College of London and previously worked in design systems analysis at Foster and Partners. With us too, we have Dr. Spiros Nikolopoulos, principal researcher at the Information Technologies Institute at CERT in Thessaloniki, Greece, and head of the Brain, Health, and Virtual Reality Research Group. Spiros holds a PhD in Semantic Multimedia Analysis from Queen Mary University of London, and he currently leads an interdisciplinary project in VR and brain-computer interfaces at CERT. So welcome, everyone. In addition to all our academic participants, we have the authors. We're all part of the ZHVR group, founded in 2014 to explore the potential of virtual reality in architecture and design. Our work spans across three areas, from using VR as a design tool, researching how virtual environments can shape the architecture and its form, and engaging the public in understanding the implications of immersive design. We worked together with Spiros on Prismark, a Horizon EU-funded project, which was steeped in real-world architecture for the AC industry. That brought us into publishing a manifesto in cybernetic architecture, and this is our latest paper, a new framework for Web 4.0 and perhaps even 5.0. So we have Helmut Kinzler, Associate Director and Head of Virtual Reality at ZHVR Architects. He's been with ZHA since 1998 and founded the group to integrate VR into the design workflows at the office. His architectural work includes major projects like the Fano Science Center and the Capitol Hill Residence, and he leads the research in cybernetic architecture. Aleksandra Mnich-Spraiter is associate at ZHVR Architects and core part of the ZHVR group. She holds an MArch from the University of Applied Arts in Vienna and a postgrad diploma from the University of Westminster. In addition to the immersive research, she works on computational geometry, interiors, and product design using VR for immersive modeling, client engagement, as well as other parts of the workflow. And last but not least, I received my MArch from Yale and hold a BFA in Fine Arts from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. I work in architectural exhibitions, and I also contribute to the studio's VR research, combining spatial design thinking to support both publications and project applications for the immersive technologies. So before we go into the paper, we wanted to give you a small set of case studies. We all know that the user-created data points are now driving the information space. This is no longer an outlier. This sort of data is omnipresent. It's part of the global cultural production. So this shows all the data points, the user ratings for IMDb, the International Movie Database, and also shows how they could be studied to create either the dominant top movies or the worst bottom 10, the top 10, and the outliers. Helmut, would you like to add anything to this?
It's just a kind of very commonplace example, but also the triviality of it, right? It's a movie database, viewers that have over 324 movies in their catalog and how they are being rated. But it's just literally an example of the information space that we are now immersed in and how it is being commercialized. And yeah.
So this is the player drop-off after a multiplayer Minesweeper game launch. The kickoff social media post was made on the 18th of March of this year, and the graph shows the data for the following day. And this is an example of the entropy in any information space, the investment to boost user engagement, and then just showing how quickly it wanes over the course of one day. The users had dropped off. Now, I wish we had data for the following day, but something tells me it's never going to reach this level of engagement. But once you get users involved, the engagement can be continually regenerated. This is a Stackla, a software which is essentially exploiting user content for corporate marketing campaigns. As successful as this is, and there is a campaign with Cirque du Soleil where user content is used to generate Cirque du Soleil's marketing, and they boast how successful this is. There are also results that we cite in our paper that show that this level of exploitation is causing users to start boycotting platforms. So this is pretty much at the edge of the current systems. And this is something which, as effective as it is, we would also like to critique.
Maybe to add, I think our interest lies very much in the collective and the role of the individual, and ultimately also how these systems, these system frameworks and the architecture of those systems ultimately dictate relationships, freeze relationships between groups of individuals or individuals, the granularity of it, and how it's sort of how the flows between them is channeled and also determined, right, by those that create those systems. When we looked at the multiplayer launch and then the sort of entropy kind of loss of interest of the users, the individual users, I think this is something that is given inside that space. And we're kind of used to that, right? We see that there's enormous initial investment and then the monetary, I mean, it is also economically related, right? So the monetary, fall off is happening. So the big MMOs, the big games, the big communities inside there to continuously raise money and try to regain interest and add assets and build bigger worlds, right? So I mean, this story has been with us for quite some time. So over the last 10, 12 years, I mean, Grand Theft Auto 5 has not seen a major rebuild, but at the same time, every month there's a new engagement. Fortnite, every time they will have to make an effort, an investment to keep their players and keep their interests alive, right? And ultimately, it's the same hierarchy, the same architecture that is underlying these spaces. The same goes for Facebook. Everything is the same, right? Now, Daria.
Hopefully, everyone here has at least skimmed the paper that we've been sitting and filtering these ideas. They've been percolating now for over a year, and I feel probably with everything that's happening in the world, they've come and kind of crystallized in this format, where what we feel is paramount is really a view of the system that allows an openness, a real openness, an autonomy, and a user sovereignty that we rarely find in technologies and immersive systems. So quickly, just to run us through some of the key tenets, we're moving from system-centric to relational design. So whereas most immersive systems are closed and hierarchical, reducing the users to data points, often for commercial exploitation, we're trying to treat the users as participants who co-create the space and their meaning through the interaction. This requires system plasticity, which is a fundamental way in which this immersed environment would respond to and evolve with the users and the content. So this is as deep and as structural as systems get. We're not talking about surface level customization. Ontogenesis over ontology. We would love for meaning to emerge over time, including the structuring of the system must respond to the process of becoming, allowing the space, the structural principles of the space to evolve and co-evolve with the users. We have the sphering protocols for co-presence. It's a framework which Spiros is familiar with because this first emerged during our research in Prismark, and it defines levels of shared experience from individual, which solitary, to planetary, global scale, encoding authorship, trust, interaction, and enabling scalable collaboration. We've set out some cultural and cognitive design principles. The design should reflect the perceptual difference and neurodiversity of the users, supporting effective cognitive and relational engagement, not enforce a uniform experience or uniform ways of engagement. So capturing the outliers. We have the idea of this companion or interfacing AI, holding back from calling it agentic AI, which is the hype word at the moment. In immersive space, it would act as the guide, enabling users shared authorship and contextual feedback. So here for us, AI is always bounded, but allowing the flexible co-construction between the user and this space, this fluid navigation between sphering levels and fluid access to information. So decentralized infrastructure. Clearly, if we have a centralized point or a locus of control, that creates the systemic inequities that we are critiquing. So we must rely on distributed technologies and also edge computing, federated identity, and open protocols. Lastly, we're seeing this architecture as an ethical interface. It is an attempt to think towards a structured openness in systems so that we do not recreate the problems that we are facing in the world, don't reabsorb them into the virtual system, but try to transcend that through a fully open and engaging space. So that brings us to the end of the key tenets. We have some examples from our work to stimulate the conversation or discussion, but I feel like perhaps it might be a good time to open the conversation. Maybe we can jump back to our work when we sort of feedback or present. Helmut, how do you feel about that?
I think yes. I mean, if there are any immediate questions, we should raise them. Maybe just also as a sort of a segue. I mean, clearly our interest as commercial architects should not be forgotten. I mean, what we're saying is clearly that the critique on the contemporary, the current systems inside the virtual and the technological information space is clearly lacking those qualities. And for that reason, it's extremely subsidized and it's not going anywhere. Right, so we're saying you need to go and consider those aspects, add those qualities, in order to have real interest, to have real growth, and to have a real beneficial technological infrastructure and augmentation to our lives and to us and our service. So that's the driver behind it. Yeah, and what we're envisaging is ultimately a space inside the information, inside the virtual information space, but ultimately, and through our kind of cybernetic architectural agenda, we also relate this to real-world architecture, right? So I mean, there is clearly a tie-in for our kind of discipline, and that's why we are doing it. So yes, if you have any questions, we should raise them immediately, or any suggestions.
I'd just like to say that I find it really interesting, the development of this protocol stack. My initial questions were, which you've already answered, are you sort of moving towards an agnostic type of architecture that, you know, is formless? Because you were talking about data management, and talking about cybernetics. So it's interesting that you're creating a framework for this. I kind of imagine a future where we have embedded AI on people's personal devices and we're having procedurally generated worlds. So I think this is an interesting sort of framework to think about how you would, the models that you would create on those AIs to generate those worlds. So it's really interesting.
I mean, we're trained and we're optimistic enough and obviously self-assured enough to produce shapes and to produce these interfaces. And I think there will be a market, hopefully for us, in there as well. I think nothing will be formless. And we're just saying we need to have the right agenda. We need to have the right ideological substrate, right, to address a market in that sense properly and professionally and ethically.
Yeah, thank you for your comment, Leon. And I guess this also brings us back to some of the examples from the work. These were sketches from the brainstorming and ideation. If you're in an immersed world and you have a search result, say highlighted in yellow, then as much as it is nice to then be able to go and explore every instance of this through walking or teleporting, at some point you may want an infrastructure that brings the information to you. And we don't see any reason why this shouldn't be possible in an immersive world. Now, what that also means is that there's a temporary instance created where the protagonist and user, let's say in red, would be able to see all of the search results brought into this space. And that has to happen without breaking the world causality. So if this happens in a kind of asynchronous, or what we call sphering level 1, where only the individual is privy to the results, or a small subset of individual users who this experience is shared with, then this in no way can start to disturb the global world. And this is part of, I think, the architectural work that's beginning to take place in quite abstract, but we're already thinking about this as a spatial construct. And this is a crucial diagram that Helmut had generated, and it's been the driver of the ideas towards the kind of technical infrastructure or framework that may need to support this world. So on the left, you have the world space where all of the co-present users can see all the data that's visible. And on the right, you have a temporary space or a search-based architecture for the protagonist user. And you can see how it weaves through the main world space to bring the results closer, and yet it doesn't disturb the other users in the beehive. I'm not sure if you would like to add some words to that.
Well, it is this sort of ad hoc, semi-asynchronous reality, right? Bubble that kind of attracts us at this stage, where you have the malleability, you have the flexibility inside the virtual information space, which we haven't really utilized. And I think there is clearly a benefit in, first of all, looking at the granularity, looking at how this space is formulated, and also what are the dynamic aspects that we can highlight and introduce, right? So engaging with information isn't the same as walking through a medieval city, or engaging with a dynamic that we are used to in our real world environments. So why can it not be more dynamic? Why can it not be more responsive, right? Cities are changing, but ultimately not in the same speed, not in the same visceral kind of qualities that individuals would be able to have access to inside this information space. And I think that's where the benefits are, and that's where also the demand would be, and not having a simple, straightforward translation of our real world constructs and systems. So this is the call to arms in a way, where we're saying what we're seeing right now, the experimentations, the developments have gone to a certain place, which is not sustainable. It's not self-creating. It's not self-propelling. And what would it take to make this a serious effort? What would make this a collective augmentation to our information needs, for example, right? Besides communication, besides socializing, cultural experimentation, etc., right? So, but the underlying architecture is currently a real problem because it is too static and it is too physical, real world like, and we need to progress. And I think the real issue here is the granularity, is the malleability of it, right? The reality shouldn't. I mean, we're talking about sort of blends between two antagonistic kind of qualities. One is the iconic, the kind of revisiting kind of knowledge, and on the other hand is the fluidity, right? And I think we're bringing those two aspects in a way that we would then call a style, or we would call a certain user preference, right? But at the same time, there is an enormous design aspect inside this fluid four-dimensional space, right? That's it.
I think maybe this would be also a good time to ask for more reflections, either directly on this question of causality or aspects of the proposal or the paper, the ideation, or if you'd like to bring in something from your research or your experience that tangentially relates but opens up the space in a way that we haven't seen, then that's welcome also.
Well, I might as well jump in. So I feel like by the way, I feel like this is like a pond of theoretical intensity that we're dipping our toes into to try to comment. But I was thinking, and this is just maybe it is creative in a poetic way to come from the outside to comment on this, as someone who produces a lot of form. There's a philosopher of science by the name of Tim Maudlin out of NYU, and he has a couple of intriguing theories about a lot of philosophers and physicists are talking about what's outside space-time. There's actually a whole trajectory of physics and philosophy that seems to be touching on that. And the way I'm looking at your system, what you're developing here, is in a way, when you're calling it relativity or relativistic architecture, it's actually inside space-time. Let's just in terms of talking, maybe setting a stage, and because we have the opportunity, and it's almost like your initial interface. Maudlin talks about outside space-time. These are all, obviously reaching, theoretically out there. But Maudlin talks about the concept of outside space-time as Euclidean, and our reality is non-Euclidean. Outside space-time, Euclidean, flatland, or it could be flatland, but it's some version of recognizable geometry, and our reality is very much non-Euclidean and full of trajectory and time and all this. So you take that one more step. He talks about a block universe, and the block universe is an infinite series of two-dimensional, of Euclidean slides. The initial Big Bang is kind of a initial entropy moving through these slides. So I'm wondering about if the interface for your system could be fully as close to ground zero geometrically as you could possibly imagine, and then the user is creating non-Euclidean space in terms of their interaction with this environment. And then I just wanted to put that out there. If anybody comments on it, great. Otherwise it's 3 a.m. here. I'm good. but right. But I would start to ask. You see, I also think that there, as soon as we are in the world, I'll say one more thing, and then I'll be quiet for a bit. But once we're in the world, we're operating politically. And I wonder what a boundaryless politics really is, and what is, because you could argue that I was going to talk about biological fascism in regard to the way, not fascism with the bad fascism, but fascia, which is an interconnecting fascia.
Right.
Fascia.
Okay.
Yeah. When you add the ism, it gets a little weird.
Yeah.
But so when you have a biological fascia, and it's connecting all our systems, it's a connective tissue that's very malleable, and you can extend it out into an understanding of the universe. Actually, that this is a organizational black matter, dark matter, or what have you. But once again, what are those boundaries, and are they necessary, and what is the boundary, and do you start this in a fully boundaryless condition, and then when you're inside the system, you're establishing boundaries? And I'm wondering about that myself. Like, the modernist project was a boundaryless project, for argument's sake, and it's got problems. If you have no boundaries everywhere, then what gets established? Now, one more little comment is that I think that the criteria, all the things that go into establishing the individual's place in the system that you're creating, that's interacting with everything. So it could be local. It's almost local, non-local, again, talking physics. And I just think it may be an endless problem, but I wonder about boundaries, and I wonder about the initial interface, like how close to zero is it?
I wanted to jump in just very briefly, and we understand ourselves as architects as also participants. Any sort of architecture or structural that is brought in would be brought in almost from that ground zero perspective. So underneath that is a consent-based framework. So if enough people in a locale wish to experience a certain type of architecture, then these users, observers, can bring in and create that. Or if there's, I think consent-based is essential, because then people are opting in to the experience. And of course, we can upload also some already existing organizational frameworks, things like nationalities or memberships to closed organizations can be supported by the system, but then the system is also open enough to allow ad hoc consent-based allegiances to form within
maybe
the
on the idea of the fascia, or kind of the congregation. I mean, we are coming from multidisciplinary design space, so that was the origin of kind of us starting to distinguish different granularities. I mean, individual and then ad hoc, joining of micro collectives to the larger public. And the sort of the strata that what we call sphering, is based on our kind of real world design industry kind of requirements, right? Where we say, okay, we're working with different legal entities, we have affinities, we have different liability groups that need to be separate, right? So it is already sort of in progress, where we say, okay, this is what we need in our industry, and what we're trying to do now in this paper is to kind of exploit that in a more kind of public general sense. But we started looking at this need for distinctive entities, for sure. And so the handshakes between them, the passing of information, and also the responsiveness to, let's say, the shared information base is ultimately sort of what we're sort of starting to see, right? So I like your sort of primordial a kind of idea of the Euclidean outside to this system. And yes, we will have a creation, right? We will need to set the rules, we need to set the structure. But as you say, once we're all in it, then ultimately it is a chaotic, it's a dynamic, responsive system. That's what we envisage. And what Daria mentioned, I mean, we defined the sort of 4 core classes for that information space, and one of them is us. So we are represented in forms of avatars, etc., in terms of our presence inside that space. So we're not looking in from the outside. We are participants. I mean, that's the key takeaway for that, what we intend to do. But yes, there will be a kind of a Euclidean outside that we'll have to monitor and operate, for sure. Yeah.
I just wanted to add something. First of all, I quite like, oh, sorry, I was trying to, I don't usually use Zoom to see the hand raising, so maybe I can wait and...
Go ahead.
No, it's all good. No, please. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Go ahead,
Okay, yeah, sorry.
I had to look for the head.
Yeah, we are used to Teams, and this is, so I still don't know where to find it, but first of all, I got very excited by the Euclidean conversation. I know it was metaphorical, but it would be fantastic if we could literally at some point have a simulation of experiencing the Sitter and Minovsky space. But besides the excitation for the sidetrack conversation on the actual creation of those spaces, in terms of those granules that you were mentioning, of course, I'm biased because I come from a robotics hardware side, but a lot of the issues, or partially those issues, maybe don't need to necessarily be addressed from a software point of view. But if we do have some sensory feedback information, similar to what the gaming chairs are doing, but on a more sort of a human biological sensing, we can create a perception of the space for the user experience. And those questions and creating that perception of the space can happen from a hardware, both by collecting the biological data and sensing data, and then we can actually have some hardware in a physical world environment. Imagine an empty room that is designed for such an experience. And so maybe that would somewhat simplify the software design and address the issue of the changes on a global scale, while locally we can have different types of experiences.
I think this affords a complete lengthy investigation. I would love to understand how this would, I mean, this feedback, this kind of homeostatic feedback, how it would drive kind of spontaneous space making. I mean, I'm fascinated. I mean, one of my most favorite quotes of all time in sci-fi in Stanislav Lem's Solaris, where the cognitive ocean is dreaming architecture. I think this was always the moment where I thought, that kind of immediacy, the kind of expressiveness, and ultimately kind of serving individual information needs, I think is brilliant. But Spiros, please, you raised your hand for quite some time now, but how did you do it, by the way?
You have to press React and then find the, and it's the little heart.
Right.
Okay. So a couple of reflections. First of all, about the non-Euclidean space. I just want to point out, I mean, maybe as an anecdotic thing, that Daria mentioned Prismark. Prismark was an EU-funded project that lasted for a couple of years, and we had some great results, I believe. I just want to say that in the original discussions about Prismark was about using virtual reality for new domains. We have specifically talked about non-Euclidean architecture, and there was this wild idea there's already some rendering engines that put forward this idea. I can put a link here and give you some. Of course, there are toy examples at that point, but I can put a link here to see how, let's say, the community is understanding this non-Euclidean space. The other thing that I want to comment is this, for me, because I come from not from the, let's say, technological background, what I find very difficult to understand and grasp is how the environment will change. I mean, I can pretty much understand how things will change in the virtual environment. I mean, we're talking about virtual worlds, we have many potentials there. We have ways to feel the cognitive load of the user, how it feels, how it reacts, and there are already much work going into the direction for things to be dynamically adaptable to better suit the condition or the profile, even the even for neurodivergent cases. I mean, there are much work there. What I find difficult to understand is how the physical world will be able to react on this. I mean, how the way I feel and the way I interact will actually impact the, let's say, my physical presence, my spatio-temporal understanding of my surrounding. This is I found very difficult to understand.
So clearly, I understand. In our kind of research, where we say, okay, how do we relate this to our 400-year-old discipline? How do we transform architecture in a sort of a dynamic way? I mean, we clearly see dynamic, right? I mean, Times Square in New York hasn't been always Times Square in New York, and it took several decades, right, to emerge, and also clearly in adjacency to the technological evolution. It is just not as dynamic as we would, let's say, experience a computer game changing our environments, right? So in a way, I mean, we're sitting between those two extremes, and I think clearly there is a scaling issue and clearly a relational issue. But dynamics is something we are used to. I think as a species, we just want to kind of exploit and maybe also fill in some of those voids that are there, right? And also highlight the fact that if we are used to a culture of extreme dynamic modulation and visual impacts on the media, on the information space side of things, our physical reality, our physical culture is also adapting, right? And I think we're always sort of bouncing between those different aspects, and therefore I think it has to be incorporated, it has to be connected. Ultimately, what the outcome is up to us. And I think it's project dependent, it is also situation dependent. So maybe with a pinch of salt, right? We're not saying cities have to ultimately change overnight, but they are changing, right?
Yes, I mean, this is where maybe a misconception happened, because when I talk about dynamic, at the back of my head, I have the real-time aspect or close to real-time aspect.
It is real-time. Yeah.
But then you say that Times Square did the change in one day, but this is, I mean, I can understand that this took decades. Okay, we can understand that we may shorten the period, but still we are very much away from experiencing a change in the surrounding environment in real time.
Well,
this is where I struggle a bit, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. But as I said, I mean, for us, this is really a kind of a foundational framework where we say, okay, you know, if I look at furniture, if I look at interior design for individual lifestyle clients, we have much more dynamic capabilities, right? We can scale this differently. And we're not saying that, you know, an urban space should change overnight. If you see how they built Hong Kong airport, this literally almost happened overnight. So, you know, changes can be affected. It is just on a much higher collective ratio where, you know, you will need a lot of impact to trigger extremely fast change. So I think there is kind of a scale aspect to it, which intrigues me as well, right? Because thank God we have a collective decision making and change influencing. It's not all up to one person, right? So, and I think there is sort of the need for a collective as well.
I think there's, for instance, a concept called population swarming that talks about how a population, when it exhausts the resources in a particular region might then start to swarm out a human population to explore unknown terrains, leaving the comfort of the familiarity behind in order to lessen the pressure on its original homeland. So in the virtual realm, if you see that there is a certain level of density or already prescription in a certain area, then there might be groups or collectives that wish to swarm out to try different modalities of engaging, different social structures, different ways of creating boundary conditions for their own very primary needs, like testing the boundaries of what education or governance might look like in smaller collectives. So really, I think we're kind of opening it up to fundamental structural ways in which we interface with society and culture. And it's quite blue sky. And we're asking what technology might be necessary, what sort of federated identities, what sort of handshakes are necessary to allow this level of openness in the first place.
But maybe if I can add, I think the question about the real-time interaction, maybe it has to do with, I think there's almost like two scales to it, because one thing is a kind of world building and creating this context, the virtual context. And the other thing is what we were talking about as a fluid UX, which is that interface that brings the information to you, which is quite what we call temporal space, but it would have some sort of expression in that world to let you interact. So we did a few of these studies where we try to develop almost like a form of that kind of AI assistant that could basically materialize in front of you to let you interact with the data. So these were just really early concepts where we tried to almost like fold the surface to maybe indicate different categories of searches, or even expand on the top, on the bottom right image, even expand it to a larger space when you interact, for example, with the larger 3D objects, or where we see this interface as something very dynamic and fluid. But at the same time, it's almost like your temporal Google search, if you think about it, within that world that surrounds you. So maybe that would be that kind of more real-time change, dynamic aspect of it, where the world is a bit more, would take a bit more time to consolidate and evolve and grow. Sorry, I didn't mean to kill the conversation.
No, just to close this, yes, I can understand. I mean, for all the discussions in Prismark, I can understand also when this is happening in the virtual space. What I find a little bit difficult to conceive and imagine is how this will take in the physical space.
Right.
I mean, there are many, let's say, technology there that it's mixed reality, augmented reality that can actually alter the way you experience your environment. So I can understand this, but nevertheless, I cannot understand, I cannot imagine that a wall will be taking a different price, a wall of bricks, and will taking a different shape just because I feel sad. I mean, just to give a very, very extreme bad thing to say what I'm struggling to understand.
Yeah. I think Spiros, I think you're very ambitious in that sense, maybe much more ambitious than we are. I mean, I remember when we talked about real-time design and co-design processes, right? Where we say it doesn't have to be synchronous, because if we need a month to develop a certain next step in the evolution of our design, then we don't have to sit there and press a button and see the immediate change, right? I mean, I think there is something to the scale, the magnitude, also the impact on others, that it kind of drives change in a different dynamic. And when we're talking real world, I think there's clearly a very, very large aspect to things that are being made. And maybe embodied knowledge is a good example, right? It takes a human several months to learn how to walk. You know, and I think there is sort of a viscosity, there's sort of a delay and a kind of a time constraint in there, the way how we interact and how we experience and how we build physical worlds. And we're just trying to see how this is being influenced, how this is being potentially guided by an information space that is augmented, it sits directly within that context. So I think we're early days in that sense, right? So maybe the changing wall, we can do that, right? I mean, if you're going Times Square and you look at the LCD displays that haven't been there before, it was glue and paper that had to be replaced, and now it's instant, right? Now you can even have individual access, right? You can have your TikTok thrown up there, and imagine the economy that would have had to be kind of installed in order to do this maybe 20, 30 years ago, right? There was no infrastructure that would allow a single person to throw themselves up on Times Square. So I think, you know, we're looking at this kind of ratio, and maybe you have to wait for us and maybe work with us to bring it to that level of responsiveness. But we are very slow, right? I mean, our neuroemitters in our brain ultimately is also something. I mean, our cultures are very, very slow to respond and to individuate and to come into that level of responsiveness. So I think we still have a little bit of time.
Okay.
I think Leon had something to say also in response.
Yeah, so just following on from that, I'm imagining currently there isn't a platform that's able to have all of those stacks on one platform. So in answer to Spirios, I imagine that some of those stacks would perhaps work through a large LCD display or the fabric of the building, whereas some of the personal stacks might only exist, say, through my AR glasses or my mobile device. Is that how you're currently envisaging it? And are you hoping that there's a future where they could all exist in one platform? Or are you not even really worried about that? It's just some design principles for you to be able to design all elements of an environment within the same conversation.
I think we're clearly interested in the fusion, right? And it's project specific, right? We need to see that there's a real demand because our efforts, all of our efforts have to be worthwhile. And it's good to be kind of fantastic about it. But at the same time, we're running a serious business. So we have to be tactile and it has to be realistic about it. I mean, we've done a few sort of prototypical projects where we blend virtual reality with the physical reality aspects of a project. And our manifesto was sort of talking about the bandwidth of how much of each of these realities we can bring together on a certain scope, on a certain brief, for whoever benefits from that. And I think maybe we kind of leave that open. I think clearly we don't want to overbear. We don't want to overwhelm, right? If there is a simple solution, even a Euclidean one, then we should take it. But I think it's more about what are the benefits? Where is the light, right? In all of this. And we see a lot of stagnation, a lot of misguided investments happening at this space, in this space. And it's too early to say, okay, we can rest and this is perfect, right? But I'm sure there are some really cool things that we could come up with, for sure. We want to change the mindset of ourselves, and we want to kind of bring into a kind of come to a point where we say, okay, let's accept the evolution of our technology, of ourselves, and see what are the benefits, and not just for a few, for everyone. Yeah.
I think just personally, the things that drive me to platforms, to social media platforms like YouTube, are the openness, the information exchange. And of course, it struggles with censorship, but there's still an idea of accessing much more diverse viewpoints than you would get on mainstream media. And similarly, there would be equally valid drivers for spaces that don't have a kind of centralized locus of direction or control, which allows people self-determination and autonomy, which is, I think, something fundamentally that we're all craving, and more so. And in a way, it's an experimental idea about what starts to happen spatially and culturally, if we can start to play around in those spaces, honestly and authentically, without any sort of ulterior aim. But then there's also the secondary question of how can we build this technologically, where we understand that most of the current technological investment comes from a technocracy, comes from a real sort of profit first agenda. Even OpenAI, this great experiment of being fed on all the information, all the cultural production from the world, then did a pivot and decided that they were going to be a for-profit enterprise that prioritizes national security over serving humanity at large. So in a way, this is what I'm grappling with personally. And I just wanted to bring that in as well.
I mean, it's almost like the early industrialists, right? I think our species has been through several of those evolutionary steps. It's just a question, what is the product, right? What is the system, what we can experience as customers, as users, and what's the trade-off, right? And we think it's just simply not good enough, right? I mean, we're literally the miners underground, and we can't see the daylight. But in a way, I mean, that's also what David pointed at. I mean, there is an outside, and somebody will have to be outside to generate this structure, this construct, and to maintain it and to run it and to finance it is definitely not going to be replaced. So we just need to look at it more carefully and see where we can come in with our tradition, and to see that we have the right values and the right equilibrium, right? I mean, there is anonymity on one hand, there's a lot of benefits in the current space that people also exploit, and misinformation and all this stuff that we should also mention is a problem, right? But anyway, I think we're probably happy for now to push this out. I think it was great to have your responses. I mean, I'm hoping that when we get a bit more resolved and a bit more in line with our mission as architects, as space makers, that we have a more kind of resolved also a response, and maybe we could talk about it again in a way that you come from your disciplines, and we can maybe have a bit more kind of tactile outcomes. But this was really to set the tone, to set the framework. I mean, the semantic trick talking about Einsteinian relativity was to sort of span as deep as we can go, and also to kind of wake us up a little bit to the fact that, I mean, the individuum and the collectives as a scale, as a kind of a spatial kind of stretch is something that we've just figured out. I think we are still in a kind of a learning stage as a species, right? How do we engage with space and civilization, and all these questions arising? How do we deal with individual interests and collective interests, and how do we understand reality as a construct, right? We have a lot of ideology, we have a lot of ideas that have been traded down towards us, and we need to kind of see what we want to do with it. And maybe that then leads to a better design. I mean, I hope, yeah. But so much for that. I think maybe we just phase out. I mean, unless you have any more questions. But I really think it was amazing to have you here and to launch our little paper with us. It would be great.
I think David, yeah, you wanted to add a little something.
Yeah, I couldn't find the hand. I went on to, but here I am. Okay, but yeah, I did want to suggest that no one's, you know, these are cliched words perhaps right now, but no one used the word disruptor. And the system, I would say the ambitions of a system like this, it is innately disruptive. It's like, you know, the rhizomatic, like I have bamboo in my garden, so I know rhizomes.
Right.
And
yep.
and it's forever there, and it's always trying to come through. You know, my lovely garden. It's my neighbor's bamboo, by the way.
Yeah. Yep.
So the you know, this idea of what we disrupt, I'll get very practical. It's on a massive spectrum. So on one level, Ezra Klein, the New York Times columnist, put out a great book. I recommend it to everybody if you haven't read it already, called Abundance. And it's a liberal's critique of liberalism. It's actually fascinating. And it had to happen from Ezra Klein. And he starts with San Francisco. He starts with critiquing California and San Francisco. And
Nice.
and I'm a practicing architect in California. I've done buildings all over the state, and the building departments are awful is not the word. It's just it's a corrupt. That would be a good word. But so you know, am I working on a startup to disrupt the building departments? Yes. But you know, I'm one of probably 10,000 people across the world who are trying to use AI to disrupt the building departments. So how, you know, that whole question of disruption associated with something like this, I think is it's on a full spectrum, because you know, there, like I said, I mean, you know, Ken Frampton was one of my teachers way back when, and he was always about politics and architecture, always. And you know, this is, everything we do is political. That's what his comment was. And I do think that the world needs a whole lot of disruption. And we're in the middle of, we're at the very start of real disruption. One or two more comments. Architecture after fire might be considered one of the first technologies. You know, the production of these, sometimes not space making, like the initial, like Stonehenge has some space, but it's really about putting something up that makes you wonder about the cosmos. So something associated with a cognitive revolution eventually started producing architecture. And I also believe the profession has to be optimistic. We're always in the moving present, but you know, and I'm speaking to Helmut Kinzler is associated with such a wonderful architectural firm. It's such a legacy, amazingly legacy architectural firm. But this sense of optimism, is it also fundamentally disruptive? Maybe it is. Maybe that is a component of all this. But I think that the import of what you're talking about seems significant on those levels. And disruption is, we're in the middle of it.
I mean, disruption happens, controlled or uncontrolled. I think there's a lesson to be learned from the French Revolution to the one that then happened in Germany and in other countries after the French Revolution. And I think what we're trying to do is to say, well, we're dealing with a huge amount of disenfranchised people, right, that ultimately have no control over their virtual existences. And if we don't give them agency, we will have a much, much bigger disruption. And I think that's what we're maybe optimistic saying, well, we need to learn our lessons from history, and we need to kind of venture into a sort of an equilibrium, right? We need to see what are the trade-offs, what is the space that we can offer. And I think there is maybe the merit, right? And there is the knowledge that we should do something. And I mean, pure, utter explosive disruptions are not something we want. I think none of us, right? The collapse is. But yeah.
Leanne, would you like to say something next?
Since we're bringing up words, so you mentioned disruption and Euclidean space, and the title is focused on relativistic, I can't say it, relativistic spaces. I just wonder whether it's worthwhile sort of thinking of this concept in terms of entanglements, because yeah, I just think maybe that's the way thought is going in terms of space and matter. So yeah, I just wondered maybe that would be worthwhile sort of incorporating that into the model or the stack.
That's a great suggestion. Yes. And feedback that also mentioned earlier, I think, has to also be bi-directional, right? So it's not just a one-way street. And I think we're also looking at accumulation of feedback, right? Ultimately, sort of a vote, right, that is happening in a way that I mean, there will be many different types of interests and different powers at stake. We know how we work, but it would be very interesting to see how this all could kind of come in, also parametrically, right, dynamically. But yeah, definitely. Great.
I'd like to ask Saina if you have anything you'd like to bring in, even if it's more about the Euclidean space that resonated so much when David first spoke about it. If you could maybe expand on that, or is anything else that caught your attention?
Sure, yeah. So in terms of the Euclidean space, I think there was within the architectural realm and the model you would have, that would make a lot of sense. But I also quite liked a metaphorical approach that was suggested for having other types of spaces. But I think it would be great, and that would be a completely separate conversation to what we are having now, because that would be a completely different model. But to have a universe where we could experience the other types of models, so de Sitter space, Minkowski, and just have, because there was a reference to the Big Bang and then the space-time continuum. But in terms of, Leon mentioned entanglement. Now, I know from a sort of a world experience, having quantum concepts might be a little bit difficult to include, but I have actually used quantum sort of principles on a different application that it might be useful. We don't necessarily need to use the quantum computing concepts at an early stage, but a suggestion is that at the core of them, they have a probabilistic approach to decision making of, so especially when you were talking about having these granules where you would have a sort of a localized effect and a global effect. So taking probabilistic approaches from the quantum theory, where your changes, the decision making on the global changes based on local dynamics, can use those approaches. I've used this in quantum reinforcement learning, and there are some documents, so if you're interested in that, I could share those. Again, it was for a completely different application, but I think it can be applied in here. And if you want to look at it, usually in robotics, they use it for path planning, where you want to go from point A to point B. And so you would have, instead of a sort of minimalizing your space continuum, you would look at probabilistics of reaching from point A to point B. So you would have a probability map, and that's your sort of, that shapes your space and your path. So I think that from Leon was quite interesting approach to consider.
Thank you. Very interesting. I mean, what I was intrigued by is the humanoid robotics ultimately are the sort of segue to the next iteration, right? That it's ultimately the human body that has the most data to train humanoid robotics. And in a way, the whole space vision that is driven by human embodiment, and then ultimately helping the evolution of robotics. I think it was fascinating for me as an architect, and to see that maybe the non-Euclidean physicality and space is something that we have to learn to understand and feel comfortable with, coming from a very conservative maybe model that we start off from. You see it? I mean, I think once we become bugs or frogs or anything that has a body and a brain, or maybe not even a biological organism, I think these spaces will be open to us once we are evolved to that level of perception. I think it's super interesting in a way. It's a different form of evolution that we're talking about.
Yeah, right? Of course. But just to let you know, I have started a very small part of this research when I was working at Foster, and they're continuing on that, completely different from the sort of the space design. But of course, humanoid and other forms of sort of more complex locomotion species is the end goal. Not necessarily humanoid, but any sort of experience, as you mentioned, frogs or else. But as a starting point, we would be looking at much more simpler perception, so very small sensing. And when we are talking about that, I know if I want to refer to a sort of an architectural analogy as opposed to sort of going into the technical, I know there is this study where there was a design space for a clinic in order to assist people with obesity. Now, in this space design, there was studies that from a psychological point of view, if you have a larger space and a larger chair compared to the standard that you would take into account into interior design, the perception of the person that has any sort of eating disorder from their body and shape is going to be different. So there are very small elements that we can work on the space design itself. But then if you have some kind of sensory elements, because we are talking about a virtual environment of how we perceive our experience and walking and motion within that space. So it can be small. We don't need to think about a complex robot. We can start from having sort of distorted sensors. We can think about smaller drones and smaller insect type robotic systems as opposed to anything more complex.
Cool. Looking forward to that one. Brilliant. Great. Yeah, so should we just wrap and reconvene in the next soon future? Thank you so much for joining. Great to have you, and really hope that we can intermesh and have this conversation maybe ongoing and evolving. For us, this was really a starting point. So we'll hopefully see you in the soon future. Thanks so much again. Yeah.
Pleasure meeting all of you.
Pleasure meeting all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Really appreciate your being here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Speak soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.